What if everything you were taught about medieval Europe was a carefully constructed lie? What if the magnificent Gothic cathedrals towering across the continent were never built by the people we call medieval at all? The official story tells us that peasants with hammers and chisels living in an era we call the Dark Ages somehow created architectural masterpieces that modern engineers still struggle to replicate. But when you look closely at the evidence, that story collapses under the weight of its own impossibility. Consider this single, undeniable fact. In the year 1200 AD, when construction of Reims Cathedral supposedly began, the entire population of planet Earth would have been fewer than 19,000 people. Not 19,000 workers, not 19,000 builders, 19,000 human beings total, spread across every continent. That is fewer people than attend a single football match today. Fewer than live in a small apartment complex. And yet, we are asked to believe that during the same period, hundreds of massive stone cathedrals were rising across Europe, each requiring millions of tons of precisely cut stone, thousands of intricate sculptures, and engineering knowledge that would not be rediscovered for centuries. The mathematics simply does not work. The logistics are impossible. The technology did not exist. And when you examine photographs from the 1800s, you see something even stranger. These supposedly medieval buildings already look ancient, half buried in soil, surrounded by people living in primitive conditions who clearly did not build them. They look like survivors, inhabiting the ruins of a civilization they do not understand. So if medieval peasants did not build these cathedrals, who did? The answer points to something far more disturbing than a simple error in history books. It points to a lost, advanced civilization, a global catastrophe that nearly wiped out humanity, and a systematic rewriting of our past. The Gothic cathedrals are not monuments to medieval faith. They are evidence of a forgotten world. And the proof has been hiding in plain sight all along, waiting for someone to do the simple math that destroys the official narrative forever. Let's start with what we've been told. The official history. The one taught in every textbook, repeated in every museum, echoed by every tour guide standing before these magnificent structures. According to this narrative, the Gothic cathedrals of Europe were built during a period spanning roughly from the 12th to the 16th century, a time historians call the Middle Ages. Reims Cathedral in France, one of the most perfect examples of Gothic architecture, allegedly began construction in 1211 and was completed in just 80 years by 1291. The story goes like this. Talented stonemasons, visionary architects like Jean d'Arbet, and thousands of devoted workers labored by hand, using nothing but hammers, chisels, and rope. They quarried stone from distant mines, transported it by horse cart and human strength, then assembled these multi-ton blocks with manual precision. This narrative is comfortable. It's familiar. It asks nothing difficult of us. It suggests a smooth progression from primitive to advanced, from darkness to light, from ignorance to knowledge. But pause for a moment. Really think about what this story is asking you to accept. We're talking about a world without electricity, without trucks and cranes, without computers to calculate structural loads or material stress. A world where the only power source was horses and human muscle. In such conditions, how do you cut granite blocks harder than most metals with millimeter precision? How do you lift 10-ton stones 30 meters into the air without hydraulic cranes? How do you calculate the complex flying buttresses and ribbed vaults that modern structural engineers still need specialized software to model? Compare this to our reality today. To construct a modern high-rise building with floor space equivalent to a Gothic cathedral, we need hundreds of engineers, machinery worth millions of dollars, and typically 5 to 10 years of work. Yet we're expected to believe that medieval people with hand tools accomplished something similar in 80 years?
with technology hundreds of years behind ours? Now, let's talk about the logistics, because this is where the official story truly begins to crumble. An average Gothic cathedral requires between 100,000 and 500,000 tons of stone. Actually visualize that number. If each horse cart can carry 500 kilograms of stone, you need 200,000 to 1 million individual cart trips to transport all the raw materials. If each journey takes 1 day from quarry to construction site, how many horses operating continuously? How many people to drive them? How much food for the horses and workers? How many roads must be built and maintained? And that's just transportation. We haven't even addressed the quarrying, the cutting, the carving of thousands of individual sculptures, the firing of bricks, the making of stained glass, the forging of iron for window frames and roof supports. Each stage requires hundreds of specialized craftsmen working for years. So who fed them? Where did they live? Who paid their wages? Where did the financing come from in a society where most people were subsistence farmers? The official narrative provides no satisfactory answers. Instead, it offers vague references to church wealth and community devotion. But devotion doesn't move stone. Faith doesn't calculate structural loads. Piety doesn't forge steel or mix mortar. So, let me ask you directly. Why are there no technical drawings from that period? Not one architectural blueprint. Not one site plan showing worker organization or construction phases. Not one ledger detailing the number of laborers, their wages, or the construction timeline. Why do almost all major Gothic cathedrals share the same story? That they were built on the ruins of an older wooden church destroyed by fire. Reims Cathedral? Fire in 1210. Chartres Cathedral? Fire in 1194. Canterbury Cathedral? Fire in 1174. Notre Dame in Paris? Multiple fires before its reconstruction. Is this coincidence? Or is this a template, a convenient explanation inserted into any historical account to fill an otherwise unexplainable gap? Why does Jean d'Orbay, the architect supposedly responsible for designing Reims Cathedral, have virtually no biography? No one knows where he was born, where he studied, what other buildings he designed. He appears in the record only as a name attached to an inexplicable structure, almost as if someone needed to assign authorship to an anonymous masterpiece. And most crucially, how did people living in what we call the Dark Ages, when the Black Death killed a third of Europe's population, when warfare was constant, when famine and disease were everywhere, how did they have the time, resources, and motivation to construct hundreds of architecturally perfect buildings down to the finest detail? The Orthodox story doesn't just have a few inconsistencies, it collapses completely when confronted with basic reality, which means we need to look elsewhere for answers. We need to examine what can actually be seen, measured, and verified. We need to follow the evidence, not the story.
Let's begin with what our own eyes can show us. Photographs from the mid-1800s, when camera technology first emerged, reveal something peculiar. In these images, the Gothic cathedrals, castles, and ancient palaces don't look like recently constructed or actively used buildings. They already appear ancient, severely deteriorated, many partially buried under layers of soil. Some cathedrals have their main entrances 2 or 3 meters below the current ground level. But what's even more striking is the contrast between these structures and the people surrounding them. In these photographs, you see individuals in simple clothing, walking on muddy, unpaved roads, using crude wooden horse carts. There's no indication whatsoever that these people possess the capability to maintain, let alone construct, the architectural complexity towering behind them. They look like people who stumbled upon and settled inside the remnants of a different civilization, a civilization that vanished long ago. This isn't speculation. You can find these photographs in historical archives. Look at images of European cities from the 1850s through 1880s. Notice how the grand stone buildings appear weathered and ancient, while everything else around them looks primitive and makeshift. It's as if two completely different time periods exist in the same frame. And that's because they do. Now let's examine the buildings themselves, the technical complexity that supposedly emerged from a primitive society. Gothic architecture uses ribbed vaulting and flying buttresses, structural systems that distribute weight through skeletal frameworks. This requires deep understanding of mechanical engineering, advanced mathematics, and material science. The stained glass windows aren't just aesthetically beautiful, they're precisely calculated to balance light and structural load. The sculptural work on the facades shows detail down to individual fabric folds, individual strands of hair, individual facial expressions. This isn't the work of ordinary craftsmen. This is the product of people who mastered high technology. Compare these to structures actually built during the medieval period. Simple wooden houses, thatched huts, even basic stone fortifications. The technological gap is enormous. It's like comparing a smartphone to a stone hammer. Both cannot possibly exist in the same era. Let's look at the tools. Museums display what they claim were used to build Gothic cathedrals: stone hammers, hand-forged chisels, simple wooden pulleys, hemp rope. But practical experiments show that with these tools, even the most skilled stonemason can shape only a few small blocks per day with relatively low precision. To complete a Gothic cathedral with tens of thousands of perfectly cut stones, you would need millions of man-days, meaning thousands of workers laboring continuously for centuries. That number exceeds the capacity of any medieval society. Moreover, many stone blocks show cutting marks that appear machine-made, perfectly flat, as if sawed with modern equipment, not hand-chiseled. Some carved details are so intricate they could only be achieved with high-speed rotary tools. But that technology wasn't invented until centuries later. Or was it? Maybe it wasn't invented, maybe it was forgotten. When you read medieval chronicles, they're filled with chronological contradictions. A cathedral recorded as beginning construction in 1200 and completing in 1280. Yet other documents claim that same cathedral was already in use during the 11th century. An architect supposedly living in the 13th century is credited with designing buildings dating from the 6th century. These aren't exceptions, they're the pattern. This suggests the chronicles weren't written in real time. They were composed later to legitimize the existence of structures that couldn't be explained. Like finding an ancient house of unknown origin, then inventing a story about who built it and when. But now we arrive at the most powerful evidence, the evidence that cannot be argued with, manipulated, or dismissed: mathematics. Let's take population growth data from the last 200 years, from official statistics published by governments worldwide. England's population grew from 9 million in 1800 to over 65 million today. Spain added nearly 20 million people in just the last 70 years. Using these documented growth rates, we can calculate backwards to determine what the population should have been in earlier periods. In 1886, barely 150 years ago, global population would be approximately 928 million.
Going back to 1817, that number drops to 314 million. By 1748, only 106 million people on the entire planet, equivalent to modern Japan's population spread across all continents. Continue the calculation. In 1610, during a period when history claims empires were expanding and large-scale wars were being fought worldwide, global population would be just 11.8 million, less than Tokyo's current population. And here comes the final devastating blow. In the year 1200, when Reims Cathedral and hundreds of other Gothic cathedrals supposedly began construction, global population, according to this mathematical model, would be 18,700 people on the entire planet Earth. That's the population of a large apartment complex in a modern city. Fewer than attend a single football match. So who quarried the stone? Who carved thousands of statues? Who cooked for the workers? Who grew the food? Who raised the children? If all 18,700 people on Earth devoted themselves entirely to one construction project, they still wouldn't have enough manpower to complete a Gothic cathedral in any reasonable time frame. Mathematics doesn't lie. People do. And these numbers prove the official story is a monumental deception. When we expand our investigation across Europe, we find a pattern repeating with suspicious consistency. Nearly every major Gothic cathedral shares the same backstory. Built on the ruins of an older wooden church destroyed by fire. Reims, fire in 1210. Chartres, fire in 1194. Canterbury, fire in 1174. Notre Dame, multiple fires. This isn't mere coincidence. This is a script. A convenient explanation to conceal an inconvenient truth. These cathedrals weren't built by medieval people. They were already there. And the fire stories were fabricated to explain why a magnificent stone structure would suddenly appear in a primitive society. And it's not just Europe. We find similar structures worldwide sharing common characteristics: massive scale, sophisticated techniques, absent construction records, and identical symbols. The griffin, a mythical creature, half eagle and half lion, appears on buildings in France, Greece, Russia, China, and even Latin America, all carved in the same style. This cannot be random. This is an architectural language, a unified code, proving these structures had a single cultural source. All these buildings are links in the same chain, parts of a vast global system we're not supposed to know about.
From all this evidence, a larger picture emerges. The Gothic cathedrals are not products of the Middle Ages. They are the legacy of a far more advanced civilization, a civilization that existed before and then vanished in a global catastrophic event. This civilization, in some old maps and censored documents, was called Tartaria, a vast empire stretching from Europe to Asia, possessing construction technology far beyond our current capabilities. They built the cathedrals, palaces, castles, and road systems using techniques we cannot replicate today. They left a uniform architectural signature across the entire world, proving they had a global trade and cultural network. But then something happened. Something catastrophic that caused this civilization to collapse almost completely. Perhaps it was a massive natural disaster, a worldwide flood, cascading earthquakes, or a sudden shift in Earth's axis. Perhaps it was a high-technology war that eliminated most of the population. Or perhaps it was an event called the Great Reset, a deliberate reconstruction to erase the old history and start again from scratch. After the catastrophe, the few survivors wandered across a devastated planet. They discovered massive stone buildings, structures their ancestors had built, but whose technology they no longer understood. They cleaned, crudely repaired, and settled inside these ruins. Over time, memories of the old civilization faded. New generations born into this world knew nothing of the past, and the historians who came later, unable to explain the origin of these ancient structures, invented stories about the Middle Ages, phantom architects, fires, and reconstructions. This hypothesis doesn't just explain Gothic cathedrals. It explains why there are similar pyramids in Egypt, Mexico, and Indonesia, why there are massive tunnel systems and canal networks no one knows who built, why ancient maps accurately depict regions that, according to official history, hadn't been discovered yet, why legends from every culture contain stories of a golden age, an era of gods or giants, followed by a great flood or terrible natural disaster. It also explains why world population exploded in the last 200 years, not because medicine or agriculture suddenly advanced, but because this is the recovery process after an event that nearly exterminated the entire human species. Rheims Cathedral is just one example, but the same phenomenon repeats everywhere across the world. In Russia, there are palaces and cathedrals with architecture identical to Europe, but supposedly built by people who never contacted the West. In India, there are massive stone temples with precision that looks laser-cut. In South America, there are enormous stone walls fitted so tightly you cannot slide a knife blade between the blocks. All these structures share one characteristic. They far exceed the capabilities of the civilizations that official history claims built them. And all are covered by vague stories, lacking evidence and full of logical contradictions. This is no longer the mystery of one building. This is the mystery of all human history. So what happened to the Tartarian civilization? There are several possibilities. One is natural catastrophe, perhaps a reversal of Earth's magnetic poles, a phenomenon scientists confirm has occurred multiple times in geological history. When that happens, climate changes suddenly, continents sink beneath oceans, and most life is exterminated. Two is human-caused disaster. Perhaps Tartaria possessed free energy technology, plasma weapons, or another form of advanced science we would call magic. A global war using this technology could have destroyed the civilization and left a barren planet. Three is a deliberate reset. Perhaps some group or power decided to erase the old history, eliminate most of the population, and re-establish the world according to a new plan. The year 1776, when America was founded and many secret organizations emerged, may mark this new era. We cannot be certain which scenario is correct, but one thing is certain. Official history is concealing an enormous truth. And here's what makes this even more profound. If this hypothesis is true, then history isn't a straight line of progress, it's a cycle. Civilizations rise, develop, then are destroyed or reset, and afterward, a new civilization begins again from nearly nothing, remembering nothing of what came before. Look at the term itself, the Dark Ages. Why dark? Because there's no historical record, because people supposedly forgot how to read and write, because all technological knowledge vanished. The official explanation is that barbarian invasions destroyed Roman civilization. But what if it's simpler than that? What if there was almost nobody left? What if the survivors were so few and so scattered that knowledge couldn't be transmitted?
What if they were literally starting over? This explains the bizarre discontinuities in the historical record. Advanced Roman engineering suddenly disappears, then reappears centuries later, during the Renaissance. Complex mathematics known to ancient Greeks is lost, then rediscovered through Arabic translations. Massive construction projects happening in the 1200s, yet no population to support them. Unless the construction didn't happen in the 1200s, unless those buildings were already standing, unless medieval people simply moved into the ruins and claimed them as their own. And if one reset happened, who's to say it won't happen again? Look at our current trajectory. We have artificial intelligence, nuclear weapons, climate change, and deepening social division. All the signs that may have preceded the last collapse. Are we approaching another threshold, another moment when everything gets wiped clean? The Tartarian cathedrals aren't just ancient history. They're a warning. They're evidence that what we think of as permanent can vanish almost overnight. That entire civilizations can be erased not just physically, but from memory itself. That the people who come after will invent new stories to explain what they find, stories that have nothing to do with the truth.
If everything we've been taught about history is false, what does that mean for your own life? If history can be erased and rewritten, is your present reality being controlled in the same way? The question isn't just who built the cathedrals. The real question is, what world are you living in? A world where truth is accessible, or a world where truth is hidden? If the Tartarian civilization truly existed and was erased, this may not be the first time. Perhaps history is a cycle. A civilization rises, develops, then is destroyed or reset. And afterward, a new civilization starts again from nearly nothing, remembering nothing of what came before. There's a perspective that suggests this world isn't a final resting place, but a testing ground, a place where human souls are placed to experience, learn, and evolve. Each civilization's cycle is an examination, and when a civilization reaches a certain point, perhaps becoming too technologically advanced while forgetting the spiritual, or too greedy while destroying the planet, it gets reset to begin again. If that's true, then we're living in a civilization approaching the next reset point. We have AI, nuclear weapons, climate change, and increasing social fragmentation, all the signs that may have been preceded the previous collapse. Think about what this means for how you view your own existence. If civilizations rise and fall in cycles, if memory can be completely erased, if what seems permanent can vanish overnight, then what is truly permanent? What survives the reset? Not buildings. We've established they get repurposed and reassigned to later cultures. Not technology. That clearly gets lost and must be rediscovered. Not even written history, since that can be rewritten by whoever survives. What survives is consciousness itself, the awareness that can observe, question, and seek truth regardless of what story it's been told. This is why they don't want you asking these questions, not because the questions are dangerous to you, but because they're dangerous to the control system that depends on your acceptance of the official narrative. When you start questioning history, you start questioning everything else the system teaches you. You start asking, is the education I received actually true? Are the media telling me the truth? Do the leaders actually care about my interests? And more importantly, do I want to live as someone who blindly accepts what I'm told, or as someone who seeks truth, no matter how difficult and frightening it may be? The journey from investigating an ancient cathedral has led you here, to questions about the nature of reality itself, about your role in this world, and about your freedom to think independently. This isn't just a video about history. This is an invitation to wake up. Because here's the deeper truth. If resets happen,
If civilizations are deliberately destroyed or allowed to collapse, then this world operates on principles most people never consider. It suggests that life on Earth is not about comfort and security. It's about challenge and growth. The hardships, the injustices, the catastrophes, they may all be part of the mechanism, part of the test. This doesn't mean you should accept injustice or stop trying to improve the world. It means understanding that the game is bigger than you've been told, that your response to these challenges, your ability to maintain integrity and seek truth in a world of lies, that may be what actually matters. That may be what determines what happens to your consciousness when this particular cycle ends. The Tartarian cathedrals stand as monuments to this truth. They're evidence that greatness can be achieved, that humanity, or something like it, once reached incredible heights. And they're evidence that all of it can be taken away, forgotten, buried under layers of soil and false history. But they're also evidence that truth leaves traces, that no matter how thoroughly history is rewritten, physical reality cannot be completely erased. The stones remain, the mathematics remain, and people like you, willing to look and think and question, you remain. This is why the investigation matters. Not just to solve the historical puzzle, but to understand what kind of world you're living in and what kind of person you choose to be within it.
We started with a simple question. How did medieval people build these perfect Gothic cathedrals? From that question, we've traveled a long road. We analyzed logical contradictions, examined photographic evidence, studied technology and ancient texts, and finally used pure mathematics to prove the official version cannot be true. The population calculation shows that in 1200 there were only 18,700 people on the entire planet. That number completely destroys the story of a glorious Middle Ages. It forces us to accept a difficult truth. The Gothic cathedrals and thousands of other ancient structures are the legacy of a far more advanced civilization. A civilization that vanished in a global catastrophe much more recently than we've been taught. From one building, we've opened a much larger picture. Human history may be a repeating cycle of rise and collapse. And we, living in this current era, may be standing before a similar transition point. I'm not asking you to believe everything I've said. On the contrary, I'm asking you not to believe anyone blindly, including me. Research for yourself. Look at the old photographs. Calculate the population numbers yourself. Question everything that school, books, and media tell you. Truth is not afraid of examination. Only lies need to be protected by censorship, ridicule, and prohibition. If official history is correct, why do they work so hard to erase every mention of Tartaria from Wikipedia, from textbooks, from public discourse? Develop the habit of rational doubt. Not doubt that rejects everything, but doubt that searches for better evidence, stronger logic, and deeper truth. Become an independent thinker in a world where most people only repeat what they've been programmed to believe. If this video made you think, if it awakened curiosity in you, this is just the first step. There are many more mysteries waiting to be discovered. Who really built the pyramids? Is free energy technology real or just legend? Why do ancient maps accurately depict Antarctica when it was still covered in ice? Who were the giants that every culture mentions in their legends? Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss the next videos. We'll dig deep into each mystery, each piece of evidence, each fragment of the puzzle about humanity's true origins. Share this video with people you know are ready to listen. Don't try to convince those who aren't, because truth only comes to those who voluntarily seek it. And leave a comment below. What do you think of this hypothesis? Do you have other evidence? Have you ever seen ancient structures that made you doubt the official story? Let's build a community of truth seekers together. The numbers don't lie. History does. And now that you know the truth, what will you do with it? The choice is yours.